Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, December 13th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. We've got 4 more episodes, counting this one, before the end of the 2021 calendar year. So hard to
Which
believe
was
we made it through
slightly
the year.
better than 2020, I guess.
Yeah, it was a step forward from 2020.
2020, one of the most awful years in existence.
It was not the leap we were all hoping for. I think if at the end of 2020, someone had said, "Here's what 2021 is going to be like," you're like, "Well,
I was
guess I'll
hoping
take
for
that."
more. I was hoping for more partying.
Yeah. So here we are. But 4 episodes to go. Lots of mailbag questions to get to on this episode. And keep sending those Rates and Barrels at theathletic.com is the easiest way to send a long question. Twitter is fine too. At Saris, at Derek Van Riper, at Brit_Drolli. Just let us know if those questions are actually for the podcast, not just general questions that you would like answered faster.
And just so that people kind of have an idea of the schedule, we'll have 2 this week, Monday and Wednesday, and then we're gonna have the Mondays going forward.
Case of the Mondays.
So if you're looking for new content, it'll come on Mondays after this next Wednesday.
Yeah, just 1 per week each of the next 2 weeks with the holiday season and travel.
We got families too.
We do. Yeah, we do. So, looking forward to spending some time relaxing and then coming back full force in January, because the one thing I always feel like that makes it officially the new season, if you're watching us on YouTube, the baseball forecaster that Baseball HQ puts together, I didn't realize Ron Shandler started this book 36 years. This is the 36th edition. This book is almost as old as I am. Jeez. Unbelievable. Yeah, I'm only 37. So the crew there, Brent and Ray, do a great job putting all that together. Great team. Always a good book to have around as a reference, but a lot of great essays and research pieces in there that you can come back to again. So definitely check that out if you don't have a copy already. Awesome stuff to talk about on the rundown today. Good mix of questions. I've been kind of cherry picking these for about 6 weeks now because there were questions coming in during the playoffs that weren't necessarily playoff related questions. And I said, let's put a pin in that. Let's get to that later. So we're going to begin with a question from OJ, who starts with, "Howdy, California, man," which I think OJ writes the emails to me only because I usually respond first. So we both respond to some of the emails. But anyway, thanks for the daily shows. Postseason's finally over. We can get down to hot stove. A question for you from both a real baseball and a fantasy perspective. Suppose, like the Brewers, you think you have 3 good to great starters, which I personally believe are the hardest thing to find nowadays, other than a 5-category offensive stud, but you're short at least 1 impact bat. Your most tradable asset is a 4th starting pitcher with at least the potential to match the other 3. In this case, it's Aaron Ashby. Or if you're all in on Ashby, you might trade Freddie Peralta. Would you trade that arm to get a bat? What level of bat? And is your answer different in fantasy than in reality? Some of the guys I'm thinking of, assuming we're staying relatively young and not super expensive: Austin Meadows, Brian Reynolds, Franmil Reyes, Bobby Dahlbeck, etc. Thanks for your consideration, OJ. So we'll start with the real side of this first, because yes, if we're looking at the Brewers, their biggest flaw is impact bats. They are short 1 for sure. How do you decide? How do you determine which of these pitchers, if any, you would actually trade?
I did try to look into aging facets of pitchers, right? When I was talking about Ray and Gossman and Stroman, I think personally, command and number of pitches would become a little bit more important in the long run than they are in the short run. That sound about right?
Yeah, I think we've always operated under the preference of, if we have a pitcher for 5 years and most skills are equal, we'd rather have the 3-pitch guy than the 2-pitch guy, or the 4-pitch guy than the 3-pitch guy. That's fair.
Yeah. Rather have Aaron Nola than Jack Flaherty.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So I guess that Peralta now kind of is a 3-pitch guy. He's finally made the work of adding pitches. I just think I would trade Ashby because my model doesn't like him as much, and he's just less established. Although there's projections, good Lord.
Projections love him.
Jeez. For a 3.16 ERA.
It's 3 pitches too. A slider, fastball, changeup, all
Yeah.
at least 19%
And
of the time.
96 mile an hour fastball. Those walk rates are really high, though. I don't know. If Ashby got me Brian Reynolds, I'd do it. But here's the thing where I think this is true for both fantasy and real, is you don't get as much for a young pitcher as you do for a young hitter.
I think it's definitely true in fantasy. I think it might be less true in real baseball.
But if
I
you're the
think
Pirates, do you really trade Brian Reynolds for Aaron Ashby?
well, they're not in a position where getting the pitching now makes sense, right? Because I do think where these questions are the most similar is timing, right? When you think about keeper and dynasty leagues and where you're at in terms of being competitive versus working on a rebuild, the pitching is usually the last thing you're going to add in a keeper dynasty league, right? You want the core hitters first because less risk, and you're right, you're going to get more in trade later by having those young hitters anyway. I think in the case of the Pirates, they would not trade for a young pitcher just yet. Actually, that might be a little bit of a stretch, though. Like, they're not as far away as we think. Maybe they're just entering that phase. Maybe this is the earliest possible time. Like the last offseason might have been a year too early. So maybe they're at the early part of that window. But what are they going to do for impact position players? They trade Brian Reynolds.
Yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily the right fit for this deal.
And just generally the way people make teams in baseball, and I mean, the way I do it, I try to mimic the way people do real life stuff, is you build the hitting first. You look at how much trouble the Marlins are having putting together a hitting staff. I mean, they've been dangling one of their pitchers forever. That's why they made the Gallen for Jazz trade. That's what you get. You give up a really good pitcher and you get a prospect bat that could or could not make it.
I think what OJ is getting at, though, I mean, I think there are some fits here conceptually. Austin Meadows makes sense, right? The Rays probably have one too many bats because of the young talent they have coming through their system. So a guy like Austin Meadows
taking advantage of some money effects where like he's about to hit arbitration and get more expensive.
Right. I think that's a realistic sort of target. And would you do it? If you have the ability to develop pitching the way that the Brewers seem to have it, then I think you have to bet on that a little bit. Now, I think the hardest thing about it is, are you comfortable taking corner guys back in the return?
That's another thing. It's like Meadows is a corner outfielder at best who is already DHing a little bit, and he strikes out a lot. So he doesn't really help you in your two, like right now, you're not, Christian Yelich is not coming off one corner. And the other corner is Hunter Renfroe, who looks like you're just going with the cheap option, right? Reynolds makes a little more sense because you could plug him in at center, and Kane's getting pretty old there. I don't know, but then it doesn't make sense on a team level.
But there's so few teams. So the question was about Ashby and Freddie Peralta. It's a Brewers question at its core, but this is a general question. You could look at other teams, and there's only a handful of other teams you could say that have enough young pitching to make trades like this. Why don't we see it? Why don't we see controllable young pitchers moved more often? Well, it's because of what the question drives at. It is difficult to develop, but if you had too much, maybe Adrian Hauser is the real answer here. You take Adrian Hauser, a guy that you don't necessarily see as an impact pitcher long term, who's getting good results and chews up a lot of innings. And if you're the Brewers, you say we want Burns, Woodruff, Peralta, Ashby, Lauer, and then our other depth guys can be our 6 and 7. Ethan Small, whoever you're going to bring up is going to kind of fill that role. But Hauser's the expendable one. And yeah, you're not going to get quite the same guys that we're talking about as possible like Aaron Ashby trade targets, but you're just trading innings. You're trading a big bundle of innings to get back in that case, you probably are taking back a corner player.
Or you're taking back a prospect.
Or you're getting a prospect.
Which might make sense for the Brewers because it's their position player prospects. It's, they have Hedbert Perez, right? Is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
And then what else they got?
Bryce Terang, shortstop.
Oh my God, they keep talking about Bryce Terang. He's not really
Garrett
a
Mitchell.
prospect, is he?
No,
Garrett Mitchell, outfielder.
Terang's kind of had a little bit of a fade. I mean, I would say Sal Frelick, who they just drafted, I think last summer, would be another higher end prospect for them.
It's just so difficult, man. Okay, so innings, Red Sox. Could you build? I mean, you're not going to get who's their center fielder prospect?
Yeah, you're not getting Jaron Duran. I mean,
But could you build Duran? Could you do Ashby for Duran?
That maybe you could do.
That's interesting to me. That strikes me as sort of Gallen for Chisholm, actually.
Right, because then you're talking about guys with really similar amounts of service time. I think that's part of it too.
Right.
Like just kind of balancing out risk, long-term value, and how long those players can be with their new clubs. I think if you get down to the Hauser level, you're hoping for like a Bobby Dahlbeck at best, like a flawed prospect. Again, a guy that probably strikes out too much, fills a need, but isn't necessarily going to be productive for you much longer than Adrian Hauser is going to be productive for Boston in this scenario.
One more name I've got for you. It's a little bit of a out of left field, out of center field, literally. Ramon Laureano. Would anybody trade for someone on suspension like that?
I guess that's possible. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't they? Maybe if you believe in the skills, why wouldn't you trade for him?
Yeah, I wonder what it would take.
Hauser does seem like an Oakland A for what it's worth. Now that I think about all the trades we've tried to make for them already. I mean, we talked about the AL West on the baseball show.
I think it might take one of those outfield prospects. I think it would be something like, if you're going to start with Hauser, it'd be like Hauser, Mitchell for
I don't know.
Laureano, and maybe one of their expensive starters. Maybe get two of the guys back for that.
Maybe get a rotation upgrade along the way. It's a short-term upgrade, of course, because we're looking at guys 1 year in some cases like a free agent,
something like that. Yeah. It's a rare thing. I think in fantasy it's less rare, right? I think in fantasy we're built so that there are contending teams that have extra young bats that they will only trade for pitching when they think that they're about to win. And I see it a lot in Dynasty where people package together a couple arms or trade a young arm for a young bat. Trade that bat to get the arm because they think they're going to win it all. But I think anybody who's rebuilding is trying to trade for bats.
I would agree with that. I think the thing I've learned playing keeper leagues for, probably more than 10 years now, you really do have to be willing to take what looks like an L by trading a pitcher that's breaking out to get young hitters back. It's hard to do it when it's actually happening because I think you have that sort of inflation in your head about, I found Lance McCullers, and McCullers is having this great year, like coming up before the injury in the playoffs. If you were a rebuilding team in a keeper or dynasty league in 2021, or if you weren't going to win the title, which was the case for me in the XFL, and you got to the late part of the season and you had Lance McCullers and he was pretty affordable and very tradable, and you didn't trade him, I think you made a mistake. And I'm saying that as someone who made that mistake because I didn't end up keeping him when he had the arm injury pop up in the postseason. I decided, you know what? We've seen this movie before. We don't normally like how it ends. So my window to trade him and probably get a lot back for him, it closed really fast. And who knows? I mean, maybe he ends up being fine. I hope he ends up being fine. But I think we forget how quickly those things can turn. The next one's Luis Garcia. I've got Luis Garcia really cheap in that league. If he gets off to another great start in 2022, if I get a good offer for him between now and the start of the season, I think I have to take it. He's a pitcher. My team's not ready to win quite yet. So I need to get better for the long haul. And he's probably one of the best ways to get it because the team that's willing to give me an impact bat or multiple impact bats potentially, they're going to want to look at Garcia and say, at least I can keep this guy for 3 or 4 years potentially, well below what he's worth. And that gives me some added long-term value aside from the immediate help. So I think it's the right way to play and keeper in Dynasty for sure. I don't think there's many people that disagree with that. Trade young pitching when it breaks out if you're not winning like right now. because there's
And in
so much
fact,
risk in holding.
I don't know if I take it to too far of an extreme, but even when I'm competitive, like for example, in Devil's Rejects, I had Bellinger, and I forget a couple people had bad seasons, but I still think we're still going to try and win next year, right? Just hoping for kind of a Bellinger bounce back. And in that case, I still traded, like here, I just looked up Cal Quantrill for Clint Frazier.
Cal Quantrill for
I think
Clint
that
Frazier,
fits what
okay.
you're saying. It looks like an L, Cal Quantrill is more likely to be useful this year and maybe even next year, but it's an OBP league. I love Clint Frazier's plate discipline. I love his reach rate. I love his power, his natural power. And I think, if you gave him a full season of rope out there, he might actually turn into an above average major leaguer.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
think
a bat.
it's a fair trade. I mean, I think it's the kind of trade that if Frazier falls into the small side of platoon again, then you can't really play him that much in that, even in a league that deep. But I think there's enough paths for him to be more productive than Quantrill that it's worth doing for sure. So that's the type of trade you should think about, because Cal Quantrill is the kind of pitcher that even in a deep dynasty league surfaces on the waiver wire at some point.
Yeah.
I think back to the RotoWire Dynasty Invitational. As a 20-team league that I was in a few years ago. I mean, John Means was a waiver wire pickup. Jordan Montgomery wasn't held when he had Tommy John surgery, so he was a pickup, a couple months before he came back. And those guys end up being good pitchers in leagues that size. So if you think you've got a good ability to find them, Ranger Suarez, I imagine that league were still happening this year, someone would have picked up Ranger Suarez off the waiver wire. It wasn't because they thought he was a great prospect and he was stashed that he would have been rostered. It was because he was freely available and making starts. Someone would have jumped in then. So if you have that ability, if you're good at that, especially, you can afford to trade young pitching that looks like it's breaking out. But the other side of this too, for keeper and dynasty leagues, we've all played in leagues where old pitchers get traded, and old pitchers get traded for less than they should. I think the discount you get on a guy like Charlie Morton, even Max Scherzer, I think the discount you can get on guys like that is often worth taking. So as a contender, I think you can afford to just go after the older pitchers, not think about the long-term future, and you'll end up doing better just in terms of overall trade value, going after those guys and flipping the younger pitchers that you found either on the wire or, more likely in the case of good young pitchers, guys that you actually had found a lot earlier in a draft and held on to for a few years.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the Pitching Plus model is it actually, its best use is working in season, off of a 1 or 2 pitch stretch, right? So we're early in the season, some no-name has a great game, and then you check the Pitching Plus model, and it's like, he has good stuff, or, and you're like, well, hey, this might be the year for Tyler Anderson or, Cal Quantrill, or maybe not be the year, and so it works faster than projection. So you can, I think this is also relevant to the question in terms of what is Ashby? How much do you know about Ashby if you're the Brewers, and how much do you know about compared to like Woodruff and, on this, and given the year-to-year variance and what the true talent of that pitcher is. So you always want to accrue. I think the questioner is right. And the very basic part is you always want to accrue that those people that will be really good year to year, and then you don't want to commit too much in terms of acquisition, money, organizational resources in terms of the ones that you're just not sure about. So I think that's true in fantasy, and that's true. And so in my case, I was like, Cal Quantrill is a nothing, is not somebody I can depend on for next year to be good. So therefore, I'd rather take the shot at a bat that can be useful like that. So
yeah, I've got Quantrill kind of fringy for the top 100 overall among starting pitchers. So that's,
ironically, now I need like a top 100 pitcher for next year. But I'll try to use some of my further away prospects with some rebuilders, and I'll go into that draft pretty hardcore looking for pitching.
Yeah, I'm just looking through the pitching list here, and what's out there. Like, where did these guys come from? I think is the question I ask when I look at rankings. Ranger Suarez, John Means, Jordan Montgomery, I mentioned earlier, free agents in a lot of keeper and dynasty leagues. Huascar Ynoa, also like that, right? I mean, he's at least a useful arm in those deep leagues. Drew Rasmussen,
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't think any team was going to push him back into a starting role. Clearly,
Yeah.
the Rays were willing to do it. Guys like Alex Wood pop up on the waiver wire in
Mm.
deep leagues like that because of
Just too old
injuries.
to be that interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they're usually like they're fringe options to be kept. Sometimes they end up being available in drafts, and they get picked up in like the 5th round of the draft by a team playing for right now.
Now look how the Giants are working. They just signed Wood, Discofani. They signed all those guys.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think it does vary quite a bit from real life to fantasy, just in terms of how it can be played, because there are so few teams that have an excess of young pitching when we're talking about real baseball. So thanks a lot for that question, OJ. A pitching question that is at least somewhat related also came in. This one comes from Daniel, who actually he didn't trick me, but he actually had a good tip for you, Eno. He said he saw your tweet about your dog with the college tweet. He said, my dog did the same thing. It turned out he had heart arrhythmia, so you might want to get that checked out. So thanks for the heads up on that, Daniel, because you never know with something like that.
Unfortunately, that dog is on to his next problem, which is his brother bit him really hard. They had a big fight, and so now he's kind of limping around because of his brother, big mean Iggy. Biting Buster. So it's always something.
It's always something with those two. They're aspiring good boys, as I like to say. But
someday.
Question from Daniel, he was wondering what our take is on the following who have piqued his interest: Roansy Contreras, Reaver San Martin, Art Warren, and Phil Bickford. So it looks like maybe 2 starters and 2 clear relievers out of that group based on what we've got so far. Contreras is interesting. Like of these names, I think he's by far the most interesting. There's velocity due to a somewhat recent uptick in the minors. There are plenty of pitches, and there might be good command too. So he could actually be one of those guys that ends up claiming a spot very quickly out of spring training for the Pirates and just sticks in the rotation all year. I think it almost comes down to health really being the main hurdle for him to get over if he's going to hold down that spot all season.
Yeah, I was really impressed by him, and I think it is there is a question of how much they're going to manipulate his service time, I guess. But I think he's so close and so ready that even if he isn't up in April, he will be by May. And then just in terms of stuff, the Pitching Plus model loves him. I'm trying to call it up right now, but
96.4 on the fastball, had a slider that he threw over 20% of the time, had a curveball, has a changeup that he mixes in every once in a while as well. So possibly 4 pitches, 3 that he at least uses enough to say that he's got 3.
105 stuff, which is a really nice one, but it's only 46 pitches, but I don't know. 105 stuff is something I'll bet on. Who was the other name among the starters?
Reaver San Martin.
Yeah, I like Contreras more than San Martin. I like San Martin, and let me see what the model says here real quick. 101 stuff, a little bit more sample. I like San Martin, but I like him as a bit of a deeper sleeper. I got him in my DC, way down, like 40th round or something. I got him in auto new for like $2. I'm not sure about San Martin because he's kind of like this multiple arm slot, a little bit of a low arm slot guy. Maybe that'll work in Cincinnati. Maybe he'll keep the ball down and have fewer homers. 101 stuff is a little bit borderline, especially given a tough home park. But a lot of funk, some decent ground ball rates. I like them both, but I definitely like Contreras better.
Yeah, Contreras, it's easy to look at that profile and see a future top 40 starter with room to be like a top 20 sort of starter.
Yeah.
That's how high the ceiling can be. With San Martin, it's a little more of a smoke and mirror sort of thing. It is a 3-pitch
I think
mix.
of who I think of a little bit when I'm looking at his lines? Sean Manaea.
I was thinking Jason Vargas.
Ooh. Well, I mean, that describes the up and down. Even Sean Manaea, I think, maybe he's back in top 30 now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I went quite that high. I'm always I think it's because of you. I've come out low on Sean Manaea now for about 2 years. And
Well,
if I
don't
look
go high
closely
on
at the
him the year he
situation,
leaves Oakland. If he leaves Oakland, we have to see how much of the brilliance was Oakland's. But it is funny to think, what would you get from Sean Manaea if you put him in Cincinnati? I'm suggesting it might be what Reaver San Martin does next year.
wow. I mean, okay. So I've got Reaver kind of as an NL only sort of guy. I don't think there's a lot of mixed league appeal. Draft and hold is kind of its own thing. You could probably throw him in there as a post round 40 guy because he'll get some innings. Like how many
Yeah.
remains to be seen. But I guess thinking about this through the lens of the first question from today's show, this is one of the teams that could actually move some pitching because you've got Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray, who
They're
are a little
talking
more
about it too. I
expensive,
mean, there's
right?
rumors. There were rumors that Castillo was already on the block.
Right. And Tyler Mahle, not necessarily stuck there. So, with Nick Lodolo and Hunter Green and San Martin, they have 3 controllable guys. See, also cheap. They could open up even more payroll by moving one of Castillo, Gray, or Mahle. And it wouldn't really surprise me at all if they did that once the lockout comes to a close. So, I think the situation there is a little different, though, because you've got guys who are a little further along. Both Castillo and Greg Gray is a seasoned veteran at this point. So trading him is not nearly the same as moving Freddie Peralta or something like that in Milwaukee. But it's one of the short list of teams where you could look at them and say, based on what they want to do and who they have, they can actually afford to trade a pitcher and still have a competent rotation left over.
Yeah. And for San Martin, he's projected for like a 50% ground ball rate, and that might be what happens. But he's also had 55, 58, so maybe he's a real standout ground baller in the making. So I do not think that he has the upside of Green or Lodolo even. But I do think he's better than Gutierrez, and I think he's probably better than Santillan, right? So even if Green and Lodolo are up, if one of Castillo or Gray are traded, San Martin looks like the 5.
Yeah, Gutierrez is another guy that is just going to be there to probably get some innings. I know we've got a friend who's intrigued by that depth in Cincinnati. And again, it would not surprise me at all if one of those higher end pitchers gets moved and guys like San Martin end up reaping the benefits. What about Art Warren, who's currently a member of that Reds bullpen? This is one of the unsettled situations league wide when you look at saves. Like who's the closer in Cincinnati? I mean, if you made me guess right now, I'd probably say I'm taking shots on Lucas Sims, but he's not so clearly the guy that you shouldn't speculate somewhere else. And maybe Art Warren is one of those guys worthy of having a dart thrown in his direction.
Yeah, it's a really, really nice slider for Art Warren. And so it is for Lucas Sims. So I think it's possible that is a mess of a bullpen that you may not want to take too many shots at. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think they post Raisel Iglesias showed a willingness to be pretty flexible about who finishes out games.
Well, that just makes it tough on fantasy, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes we get pulled into believing that a team wants to operate that way when they sort of have to. If someone doesn't take the job and run with it, there's turnover for that reason. But I think this is a team that wants to be a little more like the Rays as far as using each reliever in the optimal spot rather than having defined clear roles of 7th inning, 8th inning, 9th inning. So I would agree with the overall take here, where if you're saying how many saves will the saves leader in the Cincinnati bullpen have, over under 19 and a half, I'd probably take the under on that and assume that we're going to have a few guys chopping up the bulk of those opportunities.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think Sims might lead it with like 15. Garrett has, 7. Warren has, 10 or something, 8, like Sims did last year. Sims had 7 last year. So I think, they're going to mix and match there. So, and it's a tough ballpark, and none of those names are like can't miss names. So somebody might have 10 saves in a like Sims last year had 7 saves and a 4.40 ERA. I mean, he probably returned value, but not much. And I I had a ton of shares of Sims last year, so I don't know if I'm just saying that like I have a little bit of fatigue on this bullpen.
A little bit bitter.
Maybe, but try not to be bitter, right? Like that's a big thing in fantasy. Actually, it's like to look past the time that player may have burned you or whatever.
Oh yeah, I mean, hey, look, do you think I'm gonna have Victor Robles everywhere in 2022? Of course, it's been proven in multiple Twitter instances now when they say, think of a person in the industry and then tell me which player you think of first when you think of that person. And people from all corners of the internet are like, oh, DVR, Victor Robles. And
shout out to the people that attached me to Rich Hill.
yeah, you've done a good job making sure Rich Hill is definitely your guy at this point. Last player from that last question from Daniel is about Phil Bickford. What do we make of Phil Bickford? I mean, this is a Dodgers bullpen that may or may not get Kenley Jansen back. That is a fairly open question at this point. I would say maybe 60-40 favoring him going somewhere else is where I stand on it today. But the problem for everybody else in that bullpen is that Blake Trinan is there. And to me, Blake Trinan is easily a top 10 closer if Kenley Jansen doesn't go back to the Dodgers. Because Blake Trinan's pure filth. We've seen him return elite closer value before. The stuff looks as good as it's ever been. A guy like Bickford, I think, becomes interesting mostly in saves plus hold leagues or leagues that just reward holds on their own, because when you're looking for guys that accrue holds, you're looking for guys in good bullpens who don't blow up your ratios, who miss plenty of bats. And I think Phil Bickford is exactly that.
Yeah. There is, a little bit of concern that of the pop-up nature of, he was released last year, wasn't he, by the Brewers?
I think, he was a DFA claimed by the Dodgers, which is always just an absolute dagger when your team
could have used another reliever.
And then the Dodgers or the Rays or the Giants or, one of those teams swoops in and ends up with the player. You're like, uh-oh, wait, we may have misfired on that one.
Yeah, I wonder if they were trying to sneak him down or some sort of roster crunch. They're trying to sneak him down. But let me see here. He did appear for Milwaukee last year in one game.
Yeah.
And couldn't find the plate.
I'm trying to remember, and I'm sure there are Brewers fans out there. How do you not remember this? Oh, my 2021 was a little bit busy, but I'm trying to remember the circumstances around that appearance, like what was happening with the roster at that time, because you're right. Sometimes you moves you have to make to get somebody activated. You need to keep a fresh, ready to go bullpen, and on your list of possibilities is trying to sneak a guy through waivers, and maybe they pressed that button thinking they could do it, and they pressed the button at the wrong time.
Yeah, let me see here. Brewers designated. Oh, here we go. His spot on the 40-man roster will go to Zach Godley.
So did they need?
So that means maybe needed a starter,
or they needed someone to cover behind a starter. Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
because Godley has more innings. Godley has more innings. Bickford is a reliever. Anyway, I just want to say, in terms of year to year, Bickford has 109 stuff. I mean, he has a really good four-seam slide. He has better numbers in the model than Art Warren. If he was in Cincinnati, I would say he was the favorite to close, but he's in LA, so that's the only problem I got with him.
So I know this topic has come up on the show before, but it's fresh in my mind after I had to get an oil change on Saturday. Like, that's the exciting part of my weekend. And while the car was getting that done, a couple other things, I was reading the baseball forecaster. So I stood there at the car dealership for 2 hours like a weird person and just read a book for 2 straight hours while Christmas music was blaring in the background. So I started my weekend, but hey, you know what? It was fine. Time actually flew by. One of the parts of so Ron Shandler always has like a few pages in the beginning of the forecaster, just kind of looking at some trends from the previous year, and he was kind of banging on the table again for saves plus holds. I've been one of the people fighting back against it, mostly because I think holds are a garbage stat too, and I just think having a garbage stat like saves and adding more garbage like holds just means you've got extra garbage, and that's a bad way to make rule changes. And he acknowledged that, and he with some data showed the differences between a save plus hold league versus a saves only league, and how the standings are a lot more competitive in a saves plus holds leagues, whereas in a saves league, when a handful of managers end up with two clear cut closers, there ends up being this massive shelf where like the top 3 or top 4 end up with a 20 save gap over the rest of the field, which is bad for gameplay. So
that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because I tend to think about things in terms of player populations that are made relevant by certain things. And so I like saves holds because more relievers are relevant.
Right. And I think that ends up being a good thing because, you're not locked into as many, I don't know, consistent strategies from team to team. You're not all chasing the exact same thing. So I think that's a good thing. So I guess it's my way of saying I'm softening.
That's another way. Yeah, that's another. I think there's a few ways to judge it. What it does to the competitive balance of the team is a great way that I don't do enough of, and kudos to Ron for that. What player populations are made relevant, and a sort of a side note on what player populations are made more relevant is how many strategies does it favor. And in with saves in there as by himself, the only 2 strategies basically are punt or not.
Yeah, and he's got a chart in here. I'm just looking at it right now while we're talking. Number of pitchers with 30 plus saves, 20 plus saves, and 5 plus saves year by year going back to 2012.
Oh my God, just going down.
Right, going down. If you prorate 2020, there were 9. 2021 also had 9, 30 plus saves, that is. 19 relievers had 20 or more saves. 62 had 5 or more saves. If you go all the way back to 2012, when the chart started, it was 15 relievers that had 30 plus, 27 that had 20 plus, and only 49 had 5 plus. So there's clearly a league-wide shift. Part of that is other stuff that was mentioned in Ron's piece about injury trends. That's wreaked havoc on every aspect of the roster. But
this is also strategy and game strategy.
I think the bigger part of the trend is just more teams recognizing that the best way to finish a game is to use your best reliever in the spot where you need them the most, not just for the last 3 outs.
And statistically, it ends up being in like the 7th more often than the 9th.
Yeah.
So I think practically it's just meant that every team decided that like every team thinks now they have to have 3 closer level relievers.
Right. And I think it is, to me, a bit frustrating that we could look at the bullpens and say, this guy would be a closer here, and he's not even rosterable here. Like that's pretty bad.
What I'm saying. Bickford is not relevant for 80% of y'all.
And that's wrong. And
he's really good.
I don't ever want to tell anybody that the way I like to play is the best way to play, because I don't believe that. Like, play the way that makes you happy. But I've fought against the saves versus holds thing for what feels like at least 5 years now. And I guess I'm at least done fighting back against it. If I'm in a league where that comes to a vote, I'll probably vote for it now, because I think I see enough benefits to accept the garbage plus more garbage equals garbage. But the benefit of it is, we had
garbage.
We had a big buffet. We had a big party. That's why there's more garbage. I don't know.
2 of my favorite leagues, my longest term dynasty league, we have saves plus holds. Nope, it's a 6x6. We have saves and holds, and then in the pitchfork one, we have saves and holds, but we have 6 reliever slots.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, dedicated reliever slots is another way that works around this. I think a lot of league providers have the funky eligibility rules that can give you guys, a starter that's reliever eligible, and people leverage things that way. So I think the optimal thing for me, I'm fine with 6x6. I think 5x5 is still a little better. I think saves plus holds makes a lot of sense. If you can do a formula, some sites let you do a formula. You could do a little more weight on saves versus holds, so that way you still are trying to find the closer. But I don't think
one thing I would say is I don't think you need to. And in fact, sometimes in these save plus holds, I still try to get even as I do a soft punt, I still try to get a big closer, because one thing that people don't realize, maybe don't realize, is that even in today's MLB, the pitchers that get saves get them more reliably. the pitchers that get save chances get more reliably. If you play in holds leagues, you'll know this. When you're like searching for holds guys, sometimes they pop up, and the guy who's getting holds this week in Milwaukee is not the guy who's getting holds next week. Just remember like Jake Cousins popping up and Williams getting hurt, and and just look at Phil Bickford's rise. Like he went from DFA to getting holds for the Dodgers. So it's still good to like pay for one or two guys that'll have a role that you know of and are very good. Because if you don't get any of those guys and you're like, oh, I'll just get a bunch of holds guys at the end, you may be chasing holds the whole year, with your free agency option budget and with just all your effort.
I'm looking at the list of relievers, the leaderboard at Fangraphs, relievers 20 or more innings in 2021, sorting by K-BB percentage. Guys at the top, Liam Hendricks, Josh Hader, Raisel Iglesias, Craig Kimbrell, all drafted, all
closers.
rostered, all closers. Art Warren, number 5, coincidentally, didn't know he was there when we started this episode, but he wasn't rostered in any of my leagues last year. I don't think they're even in NL Labor. I don't think he was rostered. Maybe by someone briefly, but I don't remember even thinking about bidding on him. Taylor Rogers kind of in and out of the closer role, more closer than not rostered. Paul Sewald rostered. Lucas Sims, 8th. Probably should have been rostered in more leagues based on that. Matt Barnes, Daniel Hudson, Jimmy Nelson. I don't think he was rostered many places.
Stuff Plus loves Jimmy Nelson.
Jeffrey Springs for the Rays. I don't know anybody that rostered Jeffrey Springs. Hobie Milner in the Brewers bullpen. Wasn't that the kid on Baywatch? Hobie Milner. Ryan Presley, obviously a closer. Aaron Ashby, prospect, whatever. Matt Whistler, 16th on this list. He wasn't rostered in my leagues.
Throwing like 95% sliders.
Still worked. 26.2% K-BB. Chad Green kind of rostered in some AL.
Chad Green is like I love having Chad Green actually in any format, but in safeless holds he actually gets a little bit more value. I love Chad Green. I don't know. Maybe the magic will run out some year, but he's great.
Do you think we should add an active roster spot? If we're going to do saves plus holds, should it be 10 pitchers instead of 9? Should there be any other tweaks that go with this if we're considering trying to make these relievers a bigger part of the game?
I think if you add holds as a separate category, then you should add another reliever slot or something. Yeah. Because now it's a whole nother category you have to think about. If it's saves plus holds, I think that just revamps your reliever strategy. You don't have to necessarily add more slots.
All right. Well, I have softened. That is my official stance. I've softened on save plus holds. I'm not going to fight it anymore. But thank you for the question. I am. And thank you for the inspiration with the information, Ron. The standings cluster is what really kind of swung it for me. I had that revelation as I listened to Christmas music in a car dealership in California. This is my life now. Pure trickery in the email from Cameron, subject line, pressing Brewers questions for 2022. I'm not going to fall for that anymore, right? Just like I know there are other email subject lines to just delete. I'm going to start filtering the pressing Brewers questions into a side bin. So I'm going to let this one slide because it's a good question. Cameron writes, this is a question mostly for Eno. So here you go, Eno.
It's not even about the Brewers?
No, that's what I'm saying. It's pure trickery.
I thought he was going to at least try to pretend it was about the Brewers.
No, actually, it was pure trickery in the subject line. A nice compliment about the show, and I appreciate that. But he wants to know, you always talk about some of the magic numbers with StatCast where tools become significant. An example, 108 mile per hour exit velocity for young hitters. My question is there any research on the downslope of a player's career? Does a veteran failing to reach a 108 mile per hour exit velocity mean he might be done contributing significantly? Are there other examples of physical stats or metrics that might indicate that a veteran has lost something significant? Thanks again, Cameron.
Yeah, I'm doing a quick search here for a piece by Alex Chamberlain. On this, he has a piece called "The Near Immediate Usefulness of Max EV," and it's pretty cool to because it also Chamberlain's very good at giving you links to previous research, so you can kind of see all the work that's been done on this. it's max EV is not the best metric out there. It's only the best thing about it is that it becomes useful really quickly. And so there is that, like, a guy can come up or you can even see grainy, complex video of Marcio Luciano, like hitting something 115 and be like, whoa, that's a big deal. Right. But the problem is that it doesn't work on the other side where not having it is meaningful. It's just one of those things where when it happens, it is meaningful. But here, let me see here. Let's see here. 70th. 20% didn't even let's see here. 90% got to their max exit velo that they were going to get to in the season by the 150th batted ball. So that's game 53. So that's I guess, you kind of expect an older player just to get there, halfway through the season at least. But here's my point. By the time you get 50 games, you should be using barrel rate.
So would you argue that a dip in barrel rate at some level is enough for an aging player to pronounce decline?
Yeah. I mean, just barrel rate is the superior statistic in terms of prognosticating power. It is probably the best one. But max EV comes up because you only have, let's say you have a week. O'Neal Cruz comes up. He's been playing for a week. I don't need to know his barrel rate.
Right. Well, it's just not meaningful in a week. Yeah.
Right. But if you told me he just hit a ball 112, I'd say, well, that is good news. So the absence of it isn't really great until you already have better tools by which to kind of look at the player.
Yeah. So the player that I'm thinking about just with this question is Carlos Santana. I'm looking at his profile. Like, is he done, or is there one more year of accumulation ready to kind of find its way to the surface? I mean, the shortened season for him was brutal from a batting average perspective. He had 349 OBP in the shortened season because he still walks a ton. He hit 214 in 2021, played almost every single day. So that was a heavy anchor on that 214. And the walk rate came down quite a bit too. Still not striking out that much. Looking at the exit velocity numbers, max EVs have dipped slightly each of the last two seasons compared to where they were a few years ago. Barrels down from where they were in 2019, which that looked like a late career sort of outlier. If you look at the 5-year snapshot from 2017 to 2021, it's a lot of high sixes, mid sevens for the barrel percentage, and then a 9.6 sprinkled in there in 2019. So how would you look at that profile and assess it? I mean, is this?
Yeah, I take 2019 is like well, it's rude, but the cat bounce.
Sure.
It's the outlier. That's less rude. Ha! Found a way.
Outlier is a good way to go.
Rude. Yeah.
Let's not kill the cats.
Yeah, right. So that's the 9.4% barrel rate. Otherwise, you got a 4-year stretch of, like you say, I am going to eyeball it and say 6.8% barrel rate. So with that 6.8% barrel rate, I think the best you can expect out of Carlos Santana for next year is the 2018 season, ported over to the Royal Stadium.
Right. So a less hitter-friendly environment for homers in particular. So you lose that. And the other problem that you have with Carlos Santana is the max playing time volume. I mean, he's been remarkably durable in his career. He has played 150 or more games in every season except for one going back to 2011. Well, 2020, he played all 60 games, so we're going to count that as full credit. He played 143 games in 2012, the year where he fell short of 150. I mean, just an absolute beast in terms of playing time volume. There is nowhere to go but down. Like this guy, thinking about cars because it's the car dealership, Carlos Santana, from a durability standpoint, is like a Honda Civic. or a Honda Accord, like one of those cars that runs forever, like a 300,000-mile car. And there's one day your amazing car that you bought in college that lasted you like 20 years, it finally stops working, right? Like that's where I feel like we're at with Santana. The writing is on the wall, I think, too, because you've got Nick Pratto, who looks like a massive pop-up guy, like relative to, it's not a pop-up guy, it's the wrong choice of words. A guy that's really turned around his fate after a slow start in the Royals organization. He looks like an impact guy again. Spent half the season at AAA last year, so he's probably coming up. MJ Melendez is probably coming up. You can't fit Sal Perez, Melendez, and Pratto all together unless you have first base open. The only way you're going to get first base open is if you find a way to move on from Carlos Santana. So it might be a DFA, it might be a trade where you get nothing, but I'm worried that the playing time, even if he's healthy, is going to take a massive hit because of the guys coming up behind him.
Yeah, and in this case, the max EV is just not that useful because we have a large sample, a whole career of this player. And if you look, the max EVs have always been 111 or 112, right? That's what he's done for the whole StatCast era. And yet his power has oscillated up and down according to his barrel rate. You know what I mean? The years he has good barrel rate, he has the good power years, and the years he has the mediocre barrel rate, he has the mediocre power rate. So I think in this case, it's pretty easy to see the max EV is not a metric that's going to tell you that much about Carlos Santana. It is funny to think about, though. I mean, if you gave me his projected value, it's fun. Like, here's one of those things that's so tough about projections. Steamer has a projection for 432 plate appearances because of all the stuff you just said, right?
Yep.
There's other players they need to fit on this depth chart. However, Steamer has him projected for a 108 WRC plus. If he hits for a 108 WRC plus, he will probably be the starter somewhere.
There would be interest elsewhere in him if he's playing
too. Yeah, he could just get traded to somewhere where he would play, and then he gets to 600 plate appearances. If he does what he's projected to do and gets to 600 plate appearances, he will hit 235, 240 with 20 homers next year and be absolutely a good value in and maybe like 24 homers. He'll be absolutely a great value as a bounce back sort of $2-3 player in mono leagues.
I also think I'm trying to remember, Carlos Santana, if I remember correctly, is popular in the clubhouse. I believe I've heard that on multiple occasions now. So sorry for grasping at straws and not recalling when and where I heard it, but you could Pujols him. You could make him your bench bat. He's like an $8 million player. Even for a team like the Royals for a year, you can do that. If you have a guy that everybody likes who can come off the bench and take a good plate appearance for you, and then you can.
But I think it'd be weird to do that if he had like a 110 WRC plus.
Sure. So then you buy yourself a little bit of time. But I mean, could Nick Pratto play another position? I guess that's the thing to think about.
You know what's kind of fun about the Royals next year? 4 out of the top 7 Steamer projections for players who have not played in the big leagues belong to Royals players.
Yo, that's pretty fun.
Witt, Melendez, Pratto. Was it 4 or was it just 3? Saw a good tweet today.
There's one more, maybe?
Who has not debuted?
It's those 3 plus. Let's see if we can identify that 4th player.
I think it might have been 3.
Pratto, Melendez.
I looked at my likes.
I would think it's those. I would think it's those 3.
Yeah. Anyway, it was pretty. And Melendez is number 1, by the way. I think he's projected for like a 120 WRC plus. It's pretty nuts.
Yikes! I mean, that's awesome. Like that's gonna be a pretty fun team to watch. A lot's gonna ride on whether or not they can figure out the pitching problems. So we've got that, but all of this is to say the using StatCast for decline, like it's possible, but I feel like it's more complicated. I feel like you need a little more to figure out like the decline is actually truly happening in a way that's going to cost the player his job, because that's when decline matters. Like sometimes you decline, you take a step back, but you still keep playing because you're on a team that doesn't have anybody better. So I think that's the other slippery slope. Like you can use these flags. You can say, oh, okay, we saw a drop here in max EV, or we saw this change. but we're not actually looking at a guy that is losing his job because there are no prospects coming up. There are no interesting upper level minor league journeyman types they're going to want to share that role with. They're just going to roll with it. Example on the other side, I'm trying to think of one where Kyle Seager last year in Seattle, like there was no reason for the Mariners to back away from Kyle Seager last year. They didn't have his replacement already in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But there was, I think, pretty clear decline, even though he ended up having a great season from an accounting stats perspective. I mean, a career worst strikeout rate, career high in K and homers, but a career worst strikeout rate came with it. And he was a league average bat for only the second time in his entire career. So that to me is decline that was happening, but playing time didn't change. So it looks like a great season overall because it was a max volume situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I just think barrel rate is just the best one.
Now the tricky thing with Kyle Seager, barrel rate up to a career best last year, 12.3%.
Oh, there's always the ball. That's when the ball starts to get annoying.
Right. If Seattle was a place that was getting extra live baseballs, well, okay, that's why the barrel rate crept up. But then you have to look at home road splits, and it gets messy.
Wow, Davenport projections like Melendez. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like people are sleeping on the Royals just a little bit. Obviously, the projection systems see it. People that love prospects know there's a lot of young talent there. But how many people are going to go out there and say, I think the Royals are a playoff team in 2022?
Here's the other name. Vinny Pasquantino.
Really? Him too?
Well, here's the most bizarre part about it. Vinny Pasquantino is projected for a 115 WRC plus. That's better than the projection for Marcus Simeon, Ozzie Albies, Nick Castellanos, Starling Marte, Mitch Haniger, Austin Meadows. I don't even know who Vinny Pasquantino is.
So he's an 11th round pick in 2019. Of course, one of those guys that he would have been 22 during the shortened season that ended up being canceled in the minor leagues. So we didn't get to see him in 2020. Walk rate was better than the strikeout rate at Double-A. So he had a 13.1% walk rate and an 11% K rate.
Models love that.
And he had power.
Oh, and he had power.
11 homers in 55 games at Double-A.
Eno loves these. Eno loves these. This is like looking at Mookie Betts' profile.
Yeah, I mean, a little old for the level, but
yeah, he's old.
He's been 50% better than league average everywhere he's played since being drafted.
And only a first baseman, it looks like.
Where do you think I'm gonna break the paywall for one look up here? I'm gonna look and see where our friend James Anderson has him ranked. Do you think Vinny Pasquantino is in James Anderson's top 400? And if so, where do you think he ranks? Give me a range.
Like 275, 300.
He's got him in there. He's got him at 134.
All right.
Which is, I think, pretty good.
James likes the pop-up guys. James likes, he'll give a guy credit, not just on tools. This is a great profile, man. I'm glad I stumbled on this name. Jeez. I think this is the guy who's a problem for Carlos Santana.
I mean, they all are, but I just think the fact that the other two guys that can play that spot, that they're closer, like there's so much pressure coming. Santana seems like an almost certain bet to either be traded or moved into a much smaller role. I'm trying to remember. Okay, so
here it is. Prado played 3 games in right field last year. They're already seeing if maybe he can do that.
I'd love to see that. So you know whose profile this is for Pasquantino? This is another guy you like right now. Think back to guys who were in the minors about 3 years ago. And same position, first base. I think you mentioned this guy last week.
I mentioned him last week.
I know exactly who this player is based on minor league profile, age to level.
Had this type of stuff, like this type of minor league numbers?
Actually had better numbers at high A and Double-A in terms of WRC plus, but very similar in terms of walk rate, K rate, power, position. and
Low?
Nate Lowe. This is the Nate Lowe profile. This is exactly what that is.
Whoa,
Nate Lowe,
that's
a
loaded.
13th rounder.
That's a
Left-handed hitting
loaded
first baseman.
comparison.
I
I
think
definitely had Jason Collette blowing up my text messages after I mentioned him last week.
loaded. Was that on purpose? Did you do that on purpose?
he was saying about all the stuff that Lowe has all these problems against Velo. It's probably true.
Well, Vinny Pascantino. So Pasquantino.
He could have some flaws that we just don't know about. I mean, he is older. There could be something there.
Based on the back of the baseball card and the stats pages, he's a heavier version of Nate Lowe.
That's interesting. I thought Lowe had higher strikeout rates, and he did by a little bit, but
they were good in the minors, and then they jumped as he advanced, which I mean, that would definitely make sense. So that's where I'm at.
Well, I kind of like Lowe as a bounce back this year. So.
Oh man, we got a couple more.
I'm a sucker for those kinds of BB and K rates, though.
Yeah, we got a couple more questions to get to. This one might be a quick one. Whatever happened to Rick Porcello? This question from Tristan. He may not have Rich Hill's pitching plus profile, cough, but he was a model of consistency for a decade before the shortened season, and his year with the Mets seemed undone more by bad luck and bad defense than anything. I've never seen confirmation he's retired. Couldn't Porcello help someone if he's still in game shape? Which I actually thought this, I think going into last year, I was like, yeah, why don't we ever hear his name as someone that a team that just needs innings would be looking at?
I kept thinking he'd be like a late spring signing.
Mm-hmm. He's only 32. He'll turn 33 2 weeks from today. So happy birthday in advance to Rick Porcello. Hope you're enjoying the pod.
I don't think he'll enjoy what I'm about to say.
Well, be nice. Come on, if he's a listener. Say the negative thing in a nice way.
I will say this. I think that the reason we don't have him to kick around anymore is stuff like the stuff model.
Does this mean we're also going to say goodbye to Zach Davies very soon? Because that's a similar profile. Davies is a few years younger still, so maybe there's a little more time for him. But like, what's really the difference? Like, if Zach Davies is someone your team would be interested in, why isn't Rick Porcello also someone your team is interested in?
That I don't know so much because literally his 2020 stuff location profile says he could be near an average pitcher because he had a 90 stuff 104 location. Somebody asked me recently if I was still into Brubaker, and Brubaker actually falls in this group of kind of 90 stuff 105 location, which also includes like Alec Mills and Michael Pineda. I don't actually have a good answer for you because those guys get deals and Rick has not. I mean, perhaps there's a little unwillingness on his side just to, take the kind of deals that he's being offered. Maybe he's just being offered minor league invites and he's like, dude, if I'm going to show up, guarantee me some money. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, if I'm going to go through all the trouble of being ready to pitch, I'd like a guaranteed deal. And if I don't get a guaranteed deal, fine. I made enough money playing the game. I can never work again.
It's the Jeff Samardzija thing too, right? You would have thought that wouldn't you have thought that Jeff Samardzija would get like one more deal? Just
as a reliever or something. Sure.
You're getting these like Rich Hill, Rich Hill's getting a thing every year, sorry, Rich.
Stop bringing him into this. Rick Porcello topped $120 million in career earnings, according to Baseball Reference. So whatever happened to Rick Porcello, he's probably out spending the money that you can't spend in an entire lifetime. He's probably living his best life right now. Is Rick Porcello on Instagram?
Yeah, Jeff Samardzija had that like $150 million deal with the Giants, right?
I think Samardzija had a pretty good deal at one point. Yeah,
he had $100+ million deal. So it's just like if you say, hey, Jeff, come into camp, We'll give you on a split deal. We can't tell you they're in the rotation. You might be in the bullpen. I mean, do you know how long the sigh that Jeff Samardzija makes when he hears that offer?
Is it like a Napoleon Dynamite sort of sigh? Like, what are we? Or Tina Belcher?
And then probably some expletives and a no.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I don't think it's a full Tina Belcher situation, but yeah, over 120 million for Samardzija too. I mean, I think if you reach that level of career earnings, no matter how much you love baseball, if baseball only loves you to the tune of a non-guaranteed minor league deal for a potentially bad team where you're not going to the playoffs and you're going to have to get traded midseason if you pitch well, is that really worth it? Like, I think it's a fair question to ask.
What would Alec Mills get if he was a total free agent?
Like a 1 year, $2 million contract at the high end, and
maybe just an invite.
Maybe just an invite. I think the only thing that would make a team maybe give Mills
because he's younger.
He's younger. And he's actually 30. He's older than Zach Davies. Alec Mills is older than Zach Davies. Now, like, I realize Zach Davies looks like maybe the youngest guy to ever pitch in the big leagues, at least in the last 20 years.
Yeah, people Zach are like, duh, look at Davies.
Yeah, like, but Davies only turns 29 in February. It feels like he's been around a little longer than that.
Yeah. So,
but yeah,
anyway, I mean, that's a lesson for me also in fantasy, is just that I can't fall in love with Mills and Brubaker types anymore. You can have a couple, somewhere on your roster, but a 90 stuff, I think, is just a recipe for a terrible year at some point.
Fair enough. We got one more question from Alan that I'm going to save for a future episode because I think it belongs as part of a bigger conversation. It's about players missing time and the value of a guy that plays every day versus a guy that plays about 80% of the time. So if you have any other questions about valuations that are similar to that, feel free to fire those our way. We'll be sure to add those to the question that Alan sent in. So we'll kind of roll those together.
Is going to be a tough month, let me tell you, because I've been talking to some people in the industry about this. I think February 1 is the first date that everyone has marked on the calendar. And there is some sense that there's nothing is going to happen until there's fire under someone's butt. And I think February 1st is the first day there's really fire under someone's butt. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get very little news in January, and February it just starts cooking a little bit.
The good news is rankings can be a thing, and dissecting those rankings. And we've got some friends, we've got a few, we can, call them up, get them out of the pod, have a little fun that way too. But questions are always welcome, regardless of whether we're locked out or not. On Twitter, he's at Enosaris. I'm at Derek Van Riper. Brit's at Brit_Droll. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button for the channel and barrel up on the like button. If you are looking for a subscription to The Athletic, you can get one for 33% off the first year at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Wednesday.